Hey, what's up? This is Bryce coming at you today from New Orleans. And today I'd like to explore why a guy who can easily talk to average or cute girl will sometimes freeze up and choke when interacting with a woman of exceptional beauty, okay? We're gonna really talk about psychology of choking and how you can actually take steps to prevent it. So when you're a newbie and you're just starting out and pick up, failure is typically gonna be the name of the game. And you go up to a girl, you spot some alpha's bullshit, and if you're lucky, she actually indulges you for a minute or two until, quote unquote, you run out of things to say and walk up with a vacant look on your face, suggesting you were just sexually molested by a morbidly obese old man in an abandoned subway terminal, or maybe little bit like an advance that can open and you can hold extended conversation with women, and it may be even escalate things a romantically level, but when it comes time to close, you don't know what to do. So if you fumble the pool, or perhaps you fail to properly deal with the LMR back home, and in this our typical experience along the learning curve in cold approach pickup. But eventually, however, if you pay your fucking dues and you're also intelligent about your growth, well, you kind of get to a point where this all become all hat. You've had success, you have integrated this experience into your firmware, so to speak, and when you encounter a similar situation in the future, you know exactly what to do and you execute flawlessly for the most part, in most cases, right? You respond to the things in real time as they come up with little or no thought. And it gets to a point where you seriously cannot even relate to people who have problem in this area, as you're now completely in the realm of unconscious competence, okay? You see the girl, you roll up, you open, you hook, you start dropping statement of intent, you escalate physically, you shift into rapport building, you determine the logistical obstacle and calmly walk around them. You swash the fear back at the pad and you get it on easy peasy. But then it happens, you see your own perfect 10 at the club and you approach her and suddenly it's like you're a newbie all over again. You can't think anything to say, you misread the play, you fail to go through windows or opportunity, and you generally just kind of a dirt up until the chick leaves confused and perhaps slightly disappointed and disgust at your shameful performance. So what happened here? Well, you choke, okay? And it happened to the best of us now. Choking isn't just a poor performance. It's the worst performance that you are capable of precisely doing, because there's a lot on the line. And so this is a very, very common question that I get on bootcamp, like this weekend here in New Orleans, or from my friends. Guy be like, look, hey Bryce, I can pull like a cute average girl, no problem. When it comes to those peace time, when I step to them, I just freeze up, man, and I choke. So how can I stop that? Well, the answer lies on how our brain are structured. When you practice something so much that you no longer need to actively monitor yourself in order to be good at, and this is the unconscious processing system that are at work, when we then stop to focus on those automated action, well, we can actually interfere with those processes and end up tipping ourselves up. So fortunately, however, choking isn't something unique to pick up. It's the plague of professional athletes since the beginning of sports, and as such, it's something that I've been studying extensively, and scientists are finally beginning to understand not only the mechanism of play, but how to actively prevent it. In 2008, this psychologist, Sean Belloc, at the University of Chicago, conducted a study involving two groups consisting of both novice and skilled golfer. Both of these groups performed a series of putts, and the first group was instructed to take their time, while the second was told just to speed up to the putt as quickly as possible. All right? So now the novice golfer performed more poorly when speeding through. However, with the skilled group, they showed the opposite pattern. They actually did better when executing quickly, and they suffered when they took their time and concentrated. Now, the researchers speculate that taking your time when you've already trained something into the ground can actually cause you to start worrying, and in turn to start monitoring your performance. Now, from a neurological perspective, the part of your brain that most involved in learning new skill is actually the cerebral cortex, which control conscious thought, and is actually adaptable to novel situation. But as we practice the skill over and over, gradually the shift control of that activity to the cerebellum, okay, which is responsible for orchestrating the fast monitoring activation needed to perform complex action. Now, the problem here is that the cerebellum, unlike the cerebral cortex, is not consciously accessible. And as a result, when we try to check our progress while we're performing, something that's already transferred to the cerebellum, that's when we tend to screw things up. Now, the thing is, you need to strike a happy medium between too much monitoring and too little. No matter how advanced you are at skill, you need to pay some attention to what's happening in front of you, okay? And if you just kind of standing there in front of the girl, derping, you may not have like sufficient focus to actually follow through and get the girl at all. So what is the best course of action? Well, another study at University of Western Australia, 20 expert golfers were told to perform putts again under pressure situation, like people watching, and one group focused on 3 words that represented actually aspect of the physical technique, for example, like head, weight, arms, etc. The second group focused on words that have nothing to do with golfing, and at like red, blue, green. And the third group finally focused on a single word that simply encapsulated the putting motion, for example, smooth now. The group that focused on the physical technique actually saw a performance drop, and a similar study that was conducted in 1999 at University of Wales found that thinking about a concrete set of rules, for example, like you're a ski jumper and you're thinking, keep the ski high and my body streamlined well, that thinking about those rules, they were likely to choke than those who did not, okay? So for those who did have a specific set of rules in mind. Now, conversely, the golfer that focused on those single word cues in the Western Australia study actually performed the best of all. Now, the conclusion, of course, was the degree of focus involved in fixation of one word mantra. Not too much, not too little. Prevents you from regressing into conscious control, but it's still enough to activate the cues to get that particular motor program running. So for example, let's say if you're interacting with a girl, you find her exceptionally beautiful and you start to choke. So rather than thinking in detail about the proper course of action, like what should I do next, well, it might be better to simply focus on one mental cues, such as lead or positive dominance. Now, another trick that you might want to employ when you see yourself starting to overthinking things might be distract your mind with a meaningless detail, like, the color of our nails, or like sign behind the bar. So in fact, there was another study from University of Munich which began with an hypothesis that activation of the brain right hemisphere could actually help quiet the overthinking that causes us to choke in this high pressure situation. Now, past research on the brain has shown that rumination, aka conscious monitoring, is actually associated with the brain left hemisphere, while the right brain is associated with superior performance in automated behavior. So the right hemisphere brain controls the left side of the body and vice versa. So this researcher theorized that squeezing a ball or clenching the left hand would activate the right hemisphere of the brain and actually reduce the likelihood of the athlete choking under pressure. So they tested this theory with a group of judo, taekwondo experts and some extra soccer players as well. And in the line of soccer, the soccer group, they first had them taking penalty shot alone, and later in front of a large crowd like we have here, and clenching the left hand into a fist before the shot. And this group, as you probably predict, performed significantly better. So this little hand squeezing technique probably wouldn't help athletes. They say worse performance is based on strength, stamina, like weightlifter or like marathon runner. But these effects apply and will help with those athletes who perform these accuracy and complex sequences, such as soccer players, etc. Now, obviously, it's not hard to see how this benefit might transfer over into cold approach pickup scenario as well. So in pro sports, it's not entirely uncommon for the coaching staff to feed athletes highlight reels of their best recent performance for them to watch the morning before a game. And what's the idea behind this? Well, the point would be to rewire athlete amygdala, which is the authors in your brain where memories of extreme high and low are consolidated, and really steer into our being okay, because recollection of disaster can often trigger self-consciousness. Well, what the coaches are doing here is force feeding them an antidote, which is memories of success. Now look, let's not every day that I picked up some smoking super hardy. Well, I certainly have my share throughout my last 10 years pickup career. And so in this heated moment, I find it's beneficial to actually recall those successes and say to myself, oh yeah, I hooked up with girls of this caliber before. You're definitely capable of this further. Kind of like flip the side. It's also recommended that athletes move on as quickly as possible when they mess up to avoid ingraining the memory for deeply. Now, again, like I've said many times, I remember not taking action at all. But I remember not taking action, but I don't remember rejection at all, right? It simply does not get written to the disc. So whatever lessons that can I glean from is going to be noticed, internalized, or at this stage of my development reinforced, re-etch those neural pathways. And then the detail of it are just discarded, right? You want to be less likely to think when the hits are not of this little trick. Now, I'm just listed here who can be actually practically useful and actually based on science. Well, that's the ultimate way to make picking up a turbo hotties feel like you're just talking to some regular girl. Well, that's to confront anxiety head on and expose yourself to it at every opportunity. A 2008 study in Amsterdam took a group of cops and had half of them practicing shooting at cardboard targets, and the other half trained on firing shots directly at one another with dummy rounds. Now, after 3 of these practice sessions, They were put through an actual officer-on-officer shootout test. And with the dummy cartridge, big surprise, the cops who practiced with the cardboard actually choked in the new pressure situation, while those who had trained under the same stressful condition actually did well. So it's very common for guys learning pickup to just kind of train the basic skill, train those bases, goes into the ground. But they do it safe, average target, low risk groups of girls, and they become trained in the mechanics of game, but not under high pressure situation of the hotter girls and tougher group. So in those circumstances, you will often fail. So forcing yourself to step to the hotter girls whenever you see them is going to minimize the possibility of freezing up. For the same reason that say like letting spider crawls all over you make them less like threatening or frightening, because your brain gradually adapt to the circumstances that would have like once made you uneasy, no longer feel novel or threatening. The more exposure that you get to the hotter girls and the more that you succeed with them, the less likely you're going to get that whole effective experience. So you need to develop a rule that say, whenever I see a girl that intimidates me in the club, I must immediately step to her without thought or hesitation. Now, of course, this is one of those things that's very, very easy to say, right? But very difficult to do in practice. I discussed this with Jeff at length, and he told me that Tyler literally spent one whole year going out 7 nights a week back in 2011 to get this particular sticking points handled. And he says in retrospect, it's one of the most difficult experience he ever put himself through. But it was also simultaneously one of the most rewarding, okay? So ultimately, doing this is going to imbue you with the assurance that you can deal with any, and eventually in the field, it will further to serve cut off of any thought you may have like in the moment, and the likelihood of success with that hot girl, which is standing right in front of you. All right, guys, this was Bryce signing off from New Orleans. We're gonna go out tonight with the student and the boot camp. I'll see you next time. Peace.